Kael Darkshadow's eyes narrowed as he stood at the edge of the moonlit forest, the sound of Ryker's mocking laughter still echoing in the air. Ryker Blackwood had always been a thorn in Kale's side, but this latest affront was personal. His sister, Aria, had been brutally murdered by Ryker, and the Alpha's pack, the Lupery, had turned a blind eye to her fate. The pack law, which prioritized loyalty over truth, had condemned Aria's death as necessary to maintain order. Kale's thoughts were consumed by the weight of his anger and the burning need for justice. He was an Omega, the lowest rank in the pack hierarchy, but his skills as a huntmaster were unmatched. Ryker, on the other hand, was the most powerful Omega of all, with a ruthless ambition that rivaled even the Alphas. The Lupery pack had exiled Kale to the harsh wilderness, far from their territory and the protection of their elders. He was forced to survive alone, using his wits and cunning to eke out a meager existence. As he traversed the forest, Kale's gaze scanned the shadows for any sign of movement. The trees loomed above him, casting long fingers across the moonlit clearing. A faint rustling in the underbrush caught his attention. He drew his hunting knife, its familiar weight a comfort in his hand. With slow, deliberate movements, he crept closer to the source of the sound. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness. It was Lyra, a pack member who had been rumored to be working with Ryker. Her eyes locked onto Kale's, and for an instant, they simply stared at each other. Then, she whispered a soft, urgent warning, "Caution." Her voice sent a shiver down Kale's spine. Kale hesitated, his heart pounding in his chest. But something about Lyra's tone put him on edge. He turned to flee, but it was too late. Ryker's laughter echoed once more, and Kale felt the ground beneath him give way. When he finally regained consciousness, he found himself at the base of a cliff, the sound of rushing water a distant roar. A piece of parchment clutched in his hand fluttered through the air, carried by a stray gust of wind. As the parchment fluttered to a stop, Kale's gaze fell upon the single, cryptic message, his mind racing with the implications. "They've been watching you all along." His eyes snapped back to the cliff's edge, and he saw Lyra's figure standing just above him, her eyes fixed on Ryker's laughing form disappearing into the trees, and then, a hand reached down, grasping Kale's wrist with an icy grip, pulling him over the edge. Lyra Moonwhisper grasped the rocky outcropping with both hands, her fingers digging into the damp earth as she pulled herself up and over Kale's prone form. The forest floor was slick with moisture, threatening to send them tumbling if she didn't move fast. She yanked a tree branch from its nook and used it to drag Kale toward the pack's sacred site, her heart heavy with worry. As they stumbled through the underbrush, Lyra loomed ahead, her eyes fixed on Ryker, who was laughing and shouting at something behind them. The sound of rushing water grew louder, and Lyra realized they were heading for a waterfall. Her breath caught in her throat. She didn't want to risk Kale's neck. Lyra turned, her gaze meeting Lyra's for an instant before she vanished into the trees. A shiver ran down Lyra's spine as she pulled Kale up behind her and continued toward the waterfall. They emerged on a rocky outcropping overlooking a crystal-clear pool, its surface reflecting the sunlight like a sheet of glass. Lyra knelt beside Kale, who was slowly sitting up, rubbing his head with one hand. "I think we lost them," she said, trying to keep her voice light. Her eyes scanned their surroundings. They were deep in iron-marked territory, far from any pack members or outsiders. The forest seemed to close in around them, the trees looming like sentinels. Kale turned his head toward her, his expression serious. "What's going on, Lyra?" he asked, his voice low and rough. Lyra's grip on his wrist tightened. She didn't want to talk about it yet. "Not here, not now." As they stood up, a piece of parchment fluttered through the air, carried by the wind from Kale's hand. It danced in midair before settling at their feet, where it lay crumpled and useless. The message was still legible, though. "They've been watching you all along." Lyra's eyes narrowed. Who would do such a thing? The silence between them grew thicker, heavy with unspoken words and unresolved questions. Ryker, still out of sight, had left behind more than just Kale and their parchment message. He'd given Lyra a warning. A whispered secret in the dead of night, and now this. She felt a spark of anger ignite within her. She would find out who was watching them, all right. With a newfound determination, Lyra turned away from the waterfall's edge and led Kale back into the forest, their footsteps quiet on the damp earth. The trees closed in around them once more, casting dappled shadows that seemed to grow darker with every step. As they walked, Ryker reappeared at the edge of the pool, a triumphant smile spreading across his face. "Kale," he called out, beckoning to one of their pack members who had been hiding behind a nearby tree. Ryker Blackwood emerged from the trees, his triumphant smile still plastered on his face as he beckoned to Kale. Lyra's gut twisted with a mix of emotions, anger, fear, and a dash of curiosity. What was Ryker doing here, really? She knew it wasn't an accident that they stumbled upon this spot again, the sacred pool where her sister had been taken. As she approached the edge of the pool, Lyra caught sight of Kale perched on a nearby boulder, his eyes fixed intently on some point beyond Ryker's shoulder. Kale was always so alert, ever vigilant, and it made Lyra feel like a fragile leaf compared to him. She shot a wry glance at Ryker, her gaze lingering on the way he leaned against the pool's edge, his fingers tracing the water's surface. "What do you want, Ryker?" Lyra asked, her voice even but laced with venom. Her pride was already seared by his actions, she had no intention of letting it burn out now. "I'm looking for something," Ryker said, his voice calm and neutral, his smile still in place. "What are you looking for?" Lyra repeated, her tone clipped, her words measured. Ryker's smile grew wider. "Kale's got something we need." Lyra snorted, her voice low and dismissive. "Save it, Ryker." "What is it?" Ryker chuckled, the sound low and smooth. "We'll get there in due time." Lyra's eyes narrowed, her gaze locked onto Kale, who hadn't moved from his perch on the boulder. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice firm but wary, as she took a slow step forward. Her eyes locked onto Ryker, searching for any sign of deception, a flicker of his pupils, a twitch of his nose. Ryker's smile faltered for an instant before he regained control, his expression smooth once more. "Just Kale being loyal," he said, his words dripping with sarcasm. Lyra's instincts screamed at her to back away, but she kept moving forward, driven by a burning need for truth. "Show me," she said, her voice firm, but laced with a hint of desperation. As Ryker began to speak, his voice weaving a spell of half-truths and misdirection, Lyra felt herself becoming increasingly entangled in the web he spun. She couldn't quite see what was real anymore, what lay hidden beneath Ryker's words like shadows on a moonless night. The forest seemed to darken around them as Ryker's tale unfolded, each step into the unknown weighing heavier on Lyra's shoulders. Kale remained impassive, his eyes never leaving Ryker's face, yet Lyra could sense him seething, a contained storm brewing beneath the surface. It was then that she saw it, a thin thread of silver caught in the thorns near the sacred site where her sister had been killed. The pendant Lyra had discovered earlier glinted in the fading light as Kale's gaze locked onto it, his eyes flashing with surprise. As Ryker's low growl rumbled deep within his chest, Lyra's instincts screamed at her to trust Kale, but it was Ryker's gaze that locked onto hers, his eyes flashing with a warning that made her question everything. "What have you been hiding, Lyra?" Lyra Moonwhisper stepped back, her eyes locked onto Kale's as Ryker's low growl rumbled deep within his chest. The air seemed to vibrate with tension, making it hard for Lyra to think past the warning etched on Ryker's face. "What have you been hiding, Lyra?" She hesitated, weighing her response before answering quietly, "It's nothing, Ryker." Kale's gaze flicked between Lyra and Ryker before settling back on Lyra. His expression was a mixture of concern and wariness, but he didn't press the issue further. Instead, he reached out to gently remove the silver thread from the thorns, his movements economical. As he handed it to Lyra, their fingers touched briefly, sending a spark of electricity through her body. Lyra's instincts began to tug at her, urging her to trust Kale. But Ryker's gaze remained fixed on hers, his eyes narrowed slightly. She clenched her jaw, forcing herself to focus on the task at hand. "Let's get this back to the pack," she said, tucking the thread into a pocket. The forest seemed to darken around them, as if shadows lengthened in response to Ryker's presence. Lyra quickened her pace, her senses on high alert for any sign of danger. Kale fell into step beside her, his eyes scanning their surroundings with an air of quiet competence. Together, they moved toward the pack's sacred site, a place where Lyra had once felt safe. As they approached, Lyra caught sight of Kale standing guard near the entrance, his expression stern. She nodded curtly at him, and he inclined his head in response before turning back to watch them approach. A tension hung in the air, and Lyra wondered what Ryker hoped to gain from this confrontation. The group entered the sacred site, a clearing surrounded by ancient trees. In the center stood a monument dedicated to their pack's founder, its surface etched with symbols that seemed to match the pendant Lyra had discovered earlier. Lyra's gaze lingered on the pendant, and her mind began to make a connection. A familiar scent wafted through the air, mingling with the earthy smell of the forest floor. Lyra turned to Kale, but his expression remained neutral. A faint hum of recognition thrummed in her mind. Sable stood nearby, watching them with an unreadable face. Her eyes never left Ryker's back as she listened intently to their conversation. For a moment, Lyra wondered if Sable was listening in, or if she was just picking up on her body language. As Lyra lifted the pendant, the symbol etched onto its surface blazed to life, illuminating the ancient magic that had protected the Lupari pack for centuries and the truth about her sister's murder. The pulsing light enveloped Ryker's face, revealing the secrets hidden behind his eyes, but Lyra's gaze was frozen on the pendant, her mind screaming a single, desperate question: "What have you done?" Sable's gaze never wavered from Lyra's face, her expression a mask of concern etched on every feature. "Lyra, I swear." "I'm not looking for excuses, Sable," Lyra interrupted, her clipped tone sharp enough to slice through the air. Her eyes flashed with a mixture of emotions, but she didn't soften. She turned back to Ryker, the pendant clutched in her hand like a talisman. The symbol etched onto its surface pulsed with an otherworldly energy, illuminating the ancient magic that had protected their pack for centuries. As Lyra lifted the pendant, the pulsing light enveloped Ryker's face, revealing secrets hidden behind his eyes. For a moment, he seemed to stumble back, as if caught off guard by the raw emotion coursing through Lyra's veins. His chest heaved with a slow, heavy breath, and his eyes darted away from hers. But when she turned to him, her gaze met with an icy mask that seemed to draw the warmth from the air. The skin around her eyes tightened, and her jaw clenched in a silent curse. The air was thick with tension as Ryker shifted uncomfortably beneath Lyra's unyielding stare. His eyes darted towards the ancient tome lying open on a nearby table, its pages fluttering like wings in the stillness. A message scrawled across one of them seemed to leap out at Lyra: "The balance shifts, the moon dies." The words hung heavy in the air, threatening to consume her very soul. Sable's voice cut through the silence, her concern genuine but tempered by a quiet warning. Her eyes flicked to Lyra, a fleeting expression of alarm crossing her face before she composed herself. "I've heard enough, Sable," Lyra said flatly, her jaw set in determination. Her hand tightened around the pendant, the metal cool against her palm. "I'm not leaving Ryker until I know the truth," Lyra added, her tone guarded. Sable nodded almost imperceptibly, acknowledging the elder's resignation. A faint line etched between her brows, a sign of her deep concern for Lyra's well-being. A faint rustling sound echoed through the chamber as Kale shifted restlessly on his feet, his gaze fixed intently upon Lyra and Ryker. For an instant, their eyes met, a spark of recognition flashing between them before he looked away, his shoulders sagging under the weight of their shared unease. The lawyer's words came to mind: "You have 10 minutes, Lyra Moonwhisper. If you do not come forward with irrefutable proof, your claim will be dismissed, and Ryker Blackwood will walk free." Lyra Moonwhisper sat in front of the lawyer, her eyes fixed on Ryker Blackwood across from her. The weight of their shared unease hung heavy in the air, a palpable force that made it hard to breathe. 10 minutes, she repeated, her voice clipped and guarded. "I have 10 minutes to prove your guilt." Ryker's expression was impassive, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of amusement. He knew he didn't need proof, the pack would already accept him as their alpha once Lyra failed. "I'm afraid it won't be that easy, Lyra," the lawyer said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You'll need to come forward with irrefutable evidence, and even then, there's no guarantee of a conviction." Lyra's anger simmered just below the surface, but she kept her cool. She knew better than to let Ryker see her crack. "What about my sister?" Lyra asked, her voice steady now. "What about what really happened that night?" The lawyer's expression turned bland. "I'm sure you're aware of your sister's unfortunate passing." Lyra's frustration simmered in her chest, threatening to boil over. She bit back the retort. She needed to keep her focus. "Where was Ryker on the night of my sister's murder?" Lyra demanded, her voice still clipped. Ryker's eyes met hers for an instant before he looked away, his shoulders sagging under the weight of their shared unease. I was at a gathering, he stammered, his tone hesitant. A pack meeting. I'm sure it was there. Lyra raised an eyebrow, her voice guarded. A pack meeting? That would be impossible. Ryker wouldn't risk being seen. Ryker's face darkened, his jaw tightening in a snarl. His shoulders squared in a sudden display of defiance. Lyra's eyes narrowed, her voice still even. Who can confirm you were with someone? Ryker's face twisted in a snarl, his eyes flashing with a hint of desperation. No one. I'm the only one who knows the truth. Lyra's eyes narrowed further, her voice still clipped. What are you hiding? But before she could press him further, the lawyer jumped up from his seat. Time's running out, Lyra, he warned. You need to come forward. Lyra hesitated for a moment, and in that instant, something shifted inside of her. Her entire approach, her quest for justice, her demand for truth, it all seemed so misplaced. For the first time, she wondered if maybe Ryker wasn't telling her everything. The lawyer's words hung in the air as Lyra's eyes locked onto Ryker's, her gaze burning with a newfound intensity that left Ryker's smirk faltering. Just as it seemed the truth was about to be revealed, Ryker's eyes flicked to the door, and the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the room, growing louder with each passing moment. Lyra Moonwhisper's eyes never left Ryker's face as he stood up from his chair, his movements deliberate and controlled. The lawyer's words hung in the air like a challenge, daring her to confront him about the truth. Her fingers clenched into fists, and her jaw worked to keep her anger in check. As Ryker's eyes flicked to the door, Lyra followed his gaze, her mind racing with possibilities. The sound of heavy footsteps grew louder, echoing off the stone walls of the room. The pace quickened, the footfalls light and deliberate, as if someone was trying not to be heard. Lyra's hand instinctively went to the pendant around her neck, a small silver disc engraved with the same symbol that adorned her clan crest. She had found it near the sacred site of their pack, where her sister's body had been discovered. The cool metal seemed to anchor her to the present, her fingers tracing the familiar shape. The door creaked open, and a figure stood in the entrance, silhouetted against the bright light outside. Ryker's eyes narrowed as he took in the newcomer, but Lyra couldn't see their face clearly. It was as if they were trying to avoid her gaze, to hide something behind a mask of politeness. Ah, good timing, Ryker said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, but with a slight edge of condescension. His eyes locked onto the newcomer, and Lyra's chest tightened as she realized he was trying to distract her from whatever was happening. The lawyer's smile faltered as he took in the scene unfolding before him. Lyra, I believe it would be best if we... But Ryker cut him off with a wave of his hand, his voice taking on a sharp, cutting tone. His words hung in the air, punctuated by the sound of his breathing, as he spoke. As he spoke, Lyra felt her grip on her pendant tighten, her knuckles white as she struggled to keep her emotions in check. She knew Ryker was trying to manipulate the situation, to turn the tables and make her look like the guilty one. But she didn't let him see her turmoil. With a quiet determination, Lyra stood up, her voice clipped and guarded, avoiding direct answers. Her eyes darted to the door, her shoulders squaring as she prepared to leave. But as she turned to leave, she felt a sudden sense of unease, like the floor had dropped out from beneath her. The air seemed to thicken, heavy with an unspoken presence. The newcomers stepped forward, their features still hidden in the darkness outside. Lyra caught a glimpse of a glinting silver ring on their finger, the light catching the stone just so, and then they vanished into the light once more. Wait, Ryker said, his voice low and urgent, but with a hint of desperation. His words tumbled out in a rush, as if he was trying to salvage the situation. Lyra spun around, her voice still clipped, but with a rising edge of anger. Her hand shot out, grasping for something to counterbalance the sense of disorientation. But as she did, a hand reached out from behind her, grasping at her wrist like a vice. The sudden touch sent a jolt of adrenaline through her system, and she felt her heart racing in her chest. The next sound Lyra heard was the soft whisper of her own name, Lyra. It was a single word, spoken in a tone that sent shivers down her spine. And then, everything went black. Lyra Moonwhisper lay motionless on the forest floor, her chest heaving with ragged breaths. Her vision slowly returned, and she was met with an unfamiliar sight, a figure looming over her, their features indistinct in the fading light. Astra?" Lyra croaked, her voice a desperate whisper, the words spilling from her lips like a plea. The name seemed to come from nowhere, yet it resonated deep within her. She struggled to sit up, her head spinning as she took stock of her surroundings. The forest was quiet, the only sound the soft rustling of leaves and the gentle breeze. A faint scent lingered on Lyra's skin, Ryker's favorite fragrance, the one that usually made her feel queasy. Her mind recoiled at the memory, and for a moment, she couldn't speak. But then, her resolve hardened, and she forced out a single word, "No." With a Herculean effort, Lyra pulled herself to her feet, her legs trembling beneath her. She took a step forward, her eyes scanning the forest floor for any sign of danger. That was when she saw it, a small, silver pendant glinting in the fading light, engraved with a symbol similar to her clan crest. Her heart skipped a beat as Lyra's mind connected the dots. This pendant had been hidden away, and now it lay exposed on the forest floor. A message scrawled on the bark of a nearby tree seemed to mock her. "The balance shifts, the moon dies." Lyra's thoughts reeled with the implications. Her sister's murder was linked to an ancient magic that protected their pack for centuries. She knew Ryker had claimed responsibility, but Lyra suspected there was more to it than met the eye. As she examined the pendant further, a piece of parchment caught her eye, tucked away within her sister's locket. The parchment bore a cryptic message: "Beneath darkness lies the key." Lyra's eyes narrowed as she realized that Ryker had been trying to mislead her all along. But what did he hope to achieve by manipulating her grief and using it against her? Her anger simmered, its warmth spreading through her chest like a slow-burning fire. Her resolve hardened, fueling her determination to uncover the truth. The silver pendant glinted in the fading light as Ryker's footsteps halted just beyond her reach, his eyes fixed on Lyra with a mixture of curiosity and calculation. Lyra's eyes locked onto Ryker's, a fierce determination burning within them as she took a step forward, her hand grasping for the silver pendant like a lifeline. "You'll pay for what you've done, Ryker," she spat, her voice low and deadly, as the trees seemed to lean in, their branches tangling around the pair like skeletal fingers. Ryker's gaze held Lyra's, his eyes a mixture of curiosity and calculation as he halted beyond her reach. The silver pendant glinted in the fading light, its presence seeming to grow more significant with each passing moment. Lyra's hand hesitated, hovering above the pendant like a lifeline, her fingers brushing against Ryker's arm in a touch that was almost accidental. "You'll pay for what you've done," she spat, her voice low and deadly, as the trees seemed to lean in, their branches tangling around the pair like skeletal fingers. Her anger burned hot, fueled by the memory of her sister's murder and the sense of justice she felt was denied her. "I wasn't there," Ryker said, his voice measured and detached, his shoulders squaring slightly as he stood, as if he expected her to believe him. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Lyra's gaze snapped back to Ryker's face, her eyes narrowing as she searched for any sign of deception. She knew Ryker was lying, but a part of her couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his story. A spark of curiosity flared within her, tempering her anger just enough to keep it from boiling over. With a curt nod, Lyra turned and began to walk away from Ryker, the silver pendant clutched tightly in her hand. She didn't dare look back, fearing what she might see if she did. The trees seemed to close in around her, casting long shadows that stretched and twisted in the fading light. As she walked, Lyra's mind wandered back to the events leading up to her sister's murder. It had been a chaotic night, with the pack gathered at their sacred site for a ritual to mark the changing of the seasons. Her sister, Ilara, had been killed during the chaos, and Lyra had vowed to uncover the truth behind her death. The air grew colder as Lyra walked, the scent of damp earth rising from the forest floor, and the silence was oppressive, weighing heavily on her shoulders. She could feel the weight of her pack's expectations bearing down on her, their disappointment and anger simmering just beneath the surface. But she refused to let it get to her, not yet. Suddenly, Lyra stumbled over a hidden root, her foot catching on something metallic. As she fell, her hand slipped from her grasp, and the silver pendant clattered to the ground. For an instant, Lyra lay there, her breath catching in her throat, and her body froze. But then, without hesitation, Lyra scrambled to her feet, the pendant lying inches from her hand like a tangible promise. She snatched it up, the cool metal feeling comforting against her skin. I saw something, Lyra said, her voice even in control, as she turned to Ryker, the pendant clutched tightly in her fist. And then, without warning, she revealed what she had seen. As Lyra's words hung in the air, Ryker's eyes flickered towards the trees, his gaze locking onto something that made his face pale, and he whispered a single, chilling word, run. Lyra Moonwhisper sprinted through the forest, her heart pounding in her chest, the rhythm echoing through her very being like the metallic clank of a snare drum, as she followed Ryker's whispered warning to run for her life. The silver pendant clutched tightly in her fist seemed to weigh heavier with every step, its presence a tangible connection to her sister and the truth she sought. The trees blurred together as Lyra's gaze darted between the dense foliage, scanning for any sign of danger. Ryker had claimed innocence just moments before, but Lyra's eyes narrowed, her expression a mask of skepticism, as she gazed at the torn fabric caught in the thorn bush near where her sister was murdered. She quickened her pace, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she burst through a screen of branches and emerged onto a narrow clearing. In the center stood an ancient oak, its gnarled trunk twisted with age and wisdom. Lyra's eyes locked onto the tree, drawn to the cryptic message scrawled on its bark, the balance shifts, the moon dies. Her mind reeled as she tried to comprehend the meaning behind the words, her thoughts tangled and disordered, like a knot of twisted vines. Lyra's thoughts were fragmented, her focus broken by the weight of her sister's murder, her mind recoiling from the dark memories. As she reached for the tree, a figure darted from the shadows, vanishing into the underbrush before Lyra could react, leaving her feeling like she'd been punched in the gut. She spun around, scanning the clearing once more, but there was no sign of movement or presence. The air seemed to vibrate with tension, as if something was watching her, waiting for its moment to strike. Lyra's eyes narrowed, her grip on the pendant tightening, her knuckles white with tension. She had been so focused on Ryker that she hadn't considered other possibilities, other motivations, other secrets. The weight of her sister's murder bore down on her like a physical force, pressing against her chest and making it hard to breathe. Run was all Ryker had said, but Lyra's feet seemed rooted to the spot, her body tense with anticipation. Her eyes locked onto the parchment, the single word weight seared into her mind like a branding iron, as she felt Ryker's dark form closing in around her, the air thickening with the scent of his omega scent, and Lyra's heart screamed out in terror, "What do you want from me?" Lyra's feet remained rooted to the spot as Ryker closed in around her, his dark form looming over hers like a specter of death. She felt a bead of sweat trickle down her spine as he spoke in a low, measured tone, "What's your game, Lyra?" The word hung in the air, its meaning palpable. She knew she should run, she had seen Ryker's actions before, the way he could lash out without warning. But tonight, his eyes seemed to bore into her, as if searching for something. His gaze was like a cold wind, leaving her breathless. She took a deep breath and tried to push aside the emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. She knew Ryker was hiding something, she could feel it in her bones. The air seemed to vibrate with tension, as if the very forest itself was holding its breath. She scanned her mind for any clues, but all she found were the usual suspects. His alibi was shaky at best, and there were whispers of a mysterious figure lurking around the pack's gatherings. But Ryker's fingers drummed a staccato beat on his thigh, a habit she'd noticed before. As Lyra pondered her next move, a faint memory flared to life in her mind, a snippet of conversation between her sister and one of the elder wolves. They had been discussing something called the balance and how it shifted like the moon. Lyra's eyes narrowed, her brow furrowing in concentration. Ryker's voice snapped her back to reality, his words dripping with menace as he whispered, "You'll wait for me." His fingers brushed against her jaw, sending a shiver through her skin. "Can't," she said, her voice clipped, trying to keep the tremble out of her voice. Her words hung in the air, a challenge to his claim. Ryker chuckled, a low, menacing sound that sent a ripple of unease through her chest. His eyes glinted with triumph as he turned on his heel and disappeared into the darkness. Lyra was left standing alone in the moonlit clearing, the parchment still clutched in her hand. The word "wait" seemed to stare back at her, its meaning implicit in the silence. She hesitated, her gaze lingering on the pendant, small and silver, engraved with a symbol similar to her clan crest, lying forgotten on the forest floor near their sacred site. Lyra Moonwhisper stood frozen in the moonlit clearing, her gaze still fixed on the parchment clutched in her hand. The word "wait" seemed to stare back at her, its meaning implicit in the silence that had descended upon the sacred site of her pack's ancestors. She hesitated, her mind racing with thoughts of her sister's murder and Ryker Blackwood's suspicious alibi. As she stood there, a subtle change in the air caught Lyra's attention. The trees seemed to lean in, their branches tangling together above her like skeletal fingers. The scent of damp earth and decaying leaves wafted through the clearing, carrying with it the faintest hint of Ryker's favorite fragrance. Her heart quickened as the scent stirred a familiar reaction. Lyra's thoughts were interrupted by a soft crunching in the underbrush nearby. She spun around, her hand instinctively reaching for the dagger sheathed at her belt. A figure emerged from the shadows, its features obscured by the darkness. Lyra's grip on the parchment tightened as she prepared to defend herself, but to her surprise, the stranger didn't charge towards her. Instead, it moved with a quiet confidence, its eyes fixed on hers. "Looking for answers, I take it," the figure stated, their voice low and smooth. "Not for the first time." Lyra's instincts flared in response to the stranger's words. She took a cautious step forward, her hand still resting on the hilt of her dagger. "Who are you?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The figure stepped closer, its features slowly taking shape in the moonlight. Lyra's heart skipped a beat as she recognized the hooded figure who had been seen with Ryker, the same one who spoke in hushed tones of the prophecy. "I am Nightshade," the figure replied, their eyes glinting like stars in the darkness. "And I possess knowledge that could shift the course of things." Lyra's mind reeled as she digested this revelation. Could it be true? Was Nightshade telling the truth? "What do you know?" Lyra asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Nightshade's smile was enigmatic, but their next words sent a shiver down Lyra's spine. The events that have transpired don't align with what they seem. As Nightshade spoke, the trees around them seemed to shift and twist, as if reality itself was bending to accommodate this new information. As Nightshade's words hung in the air, Lyra's grip on the parchment slipped, sending the parchment flying from her grasp, its pages fluttering like a bird's wings in the sudden gust of wind that followed. The wind died as suddenly as it had begun, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake, and Lyra's eyes locked onto the parchment as it drifted closer to the figure at her feet. Its words, "What does it say?" whispering back to her from the fluttering pages. As Nightshade's words hung in the air, Lyra's grip on the parchment slipped, sending the pages fluttering like a bird's wings in the sudden gust of wind that followed. The wind died as suddenly as it had begun, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake, and Lyra's eyes locked onto the parchment as it drifted closer to the figure at her feet. She couldn't help but think of her sister, Aria, whose memory still lingered heavy in her mind like a wound that refused to heal. The pain of their loss had driven her to seek answers, to unravel the tangled threads of fate that seemed to have led to Aria's tragic death. Her fingers instinctively tightened around her pack, a habitual gesture that betrayed her unease. With a quiet intensity, Lyra knelt beside the parchment, her fingers brushing against the worn pages as if seeking confirmation that this was indeed the truth she had been searching for. The symbol on the pendant seemed to match the strange markings scattered throughout the ancient tome, sending a shiver down her spine. It was as though the threads of destiny were weaving together into a tapestry of secrets and lies. As Lyra studied the parchment more closely, she noticed something peculiar. A faint scent lingered in the creases of her fingers, like the lingering hint of Ryker's favorite fragrance. Her grip on her packmate's arm tightened, a subtle squeeze that spoke of a growing tension between them. She pulled away from the parchment, letting it flutter back onto the grassy earth beside her. "Don't read too much into it," she muttered to herself, not wanting to acknowledge the unease growing inside her. Nightshade's parting words still resonated in her mind. "Just be careful, then." It was an advice Lyra couldn't shake off, not even when she considered Ryker's charming facade and smooth-talking demeanor. Her brow furrowed, a habitual crease that reflected her skepticism. A faint rustling came from the nearby thicket, making Lyra rise to her feet. She had been so caught up in thought that she hadn't noticed it before, a figure moving with deliberate stealth through the underbrush. Nightshade followed her gaze, their eyes narrowing into slits as they watched the shadowy form. "Who is that?" Nightshade's voice was barely above a whisper, the words clipped and guarded, as if they were hesitant to reveal more. Lyra's eyes never left the figure, her pupils constricting in response to the sudden threat. The air seemed to vibrate with tension as the figure stepped into the moonlight, its features illuminated by the silver glow, revealing a face that sent a shiver down Lyra's spine. Her own sister, Aria, stood before her, eyes cold, expression vacant, and voice whispering a single, chilling word, mine. Lyra's gaze locked onto Aria's face, her mind reeling with questions and emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. She tried to take a step forward, but her legs felt rooted to the spot, as if they'd been turned to stone by some unseen force. Aria's voice whispered mine again, its haunting quality sending shivers down Lyra's spine. The words seemed to carry an otherworldly weight, one that resonated deep within Lyra's chest. Her heart stuttered, and her breath caught in her throat. Lyra's eyes darted toward the surrounding trees, searching for any sign of help or escape. But they were alone in this clearing, surrounded by nothing but the darkness and the oppressive silence that seemed to suffocate her. Her mind racing with thoughts of self-preservation, Lyra tried to take another step forward, but her feet refused to budge. It was as if she'd been hypnotized, trapped in a web of her own making. Aria's gaze held her captive, its intensity like a physical force that pinned her to the ground. The air seemed heavy with tension, thickening into a tangible presence that Lyra could feel pressing down upon her. Her thoughts trembled, and her voice faltered as she tried to raise an eyebrow, to signal that she wouldn't be intimidated. As the seconds ticked by, Lyra's breathing grew more ragged, her chest heaving with a mixture of fear and panic. Her eyes never left Aria's face, even as her mind screamed at her to look away, to escape this living nightmare. And then, just when it seemed like she couldn't take any more, the trees around them began to sway ominously in the breeze, their branches creaking and groaning like the very fabric of reality was unraveling before her eyes. Aria's voice whispered mine again, its haunting quality lingering in Lyra's ears like a bad omen. Lyra's eyes flashed up, a warning in her gaze, but her words were clipped and guarded. As she spoke, the trees around them seemed to draw closer, their branches tangling together above Lyra's head like skeletal fingers. Aria's face twisted into a snarl, and Lyra's breath caught in her throat as she whispered a single, shattering word, why? Lyra's gaze locked onto Aria's, the warning in her eyes a stark contrast to the snarl twisting Aria's face. What's going on? Lyra asked, her voice low and even, as the trees around them seemed to draw closer, their branches tangling together above Lyra's head like skeletal fingers. Aria's eyes flashed with anger, but Lyra's gaze held firm, a reminder that she wasn't backing down. The air was heavy with tension, the only sound the creaking of branches and the distant hoot of an owl. Lyra's breath quickened as she whispered, we need to talk, Aria. Outside. The forest floor seemed to shift beneath their feet as Aria turned away, her eyes darting towards the forest beyond their clearing. Lyra's heart quickened, the silence between them thick with unspoken words. They walked in silence, the trees looming above them like sentinels, until they reached the edge of the clearing. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the forest floor, and Lyra's chest tightened with a mix of fear and frustration. She thought of her sister, of Ryker's claims that he'd killed her in a fit of rage. The Omega's dominance was supposed to be a privilege, not a right. Lyra's mind replayed the events leading up to the murder, the way Ryker's aggression had grown, the way he'd tried to isolate Aria from their pack. As she stood there, the trees seemed to close in around her, their branches creaking ominously. Lyra's gaze dropped to the silver pendant on her wrist, its familiar way to comfort in these uncertain times. She thought of all the times she'd worn it, feeling like an outsider among her own pack. Maybe this was why Ryker had killed her sister, because he saw Lyra as weak, unworthy. The scent of Ryker's favorite fragrance wafted through the air, carrying on the breeze like a promise of hope. Lyra's stomach twisted with a knot of tension, but she didn't look back. Instead, she took a deep breath and let her eyes scan the forest, searching for any sign of Ryker or his pack. Aria stood beside her, her eyes fixed on the trees, her face a mask of tension. Lyra knew better than to play along, not now, not when the truth was finally within reach. She turned to Aria, her voice barely audible, I need to know what Ryker's plan is. I need to know what he's going to do next. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the only sound the soft rustle of leaves. Aria's eyes locked onto Lyra's, a spark of determination igniting within them. Together, they vanished into the underbrush, leaving the trees to their secrets.